Recently, one of the most controversial topics surrounding the NFL is the ongoing accusations of the now Cleveland Brown quarterback Deshaun Watson. As of writing this, he has been accused of 26 separate accounts of sexual assault and settled 23 of them outside of court. Though I wish I could say this was an unprecedented occurrence in America's biggest sports league, there is a history of sexual assault accusations surrounding current and former players. The aspect of this story that has grasped the attention of the public has been the controversy surrounding his punishment applied by the NFL. The NFL brought in an arbitrator to weigh the evidence and suggest a punishment to the league. In this case, that arbitrator was Sue L. Robinson. After investigating the situation, she reported that there was significant evidence of sexual assault. She then recommended a 6-game suspension. People around the league and around the country were outraged at this conclusion. The NFL later dismissed this suggestion and opted instead for an 11-game suspension as well as mandatory counseling. This change did not seem to change public opinion that the NFL was not doing enough and didn't care about what Watson was accused of doing. It didn't help that the first game he'd be able to play when he got back would be against his former team, the Houston Texans. The NFL seemed to be using this to build up a game later in the season instead of as a punishment for misconduct. Watson's contract was fully guaranteed and backloaded, so he would receive no financial repercussions for his actions. Watson would sit out for only 11 games for the 23 accusations he had at the time. Comparatively, Calvin Ridley, a receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, will sit out the entire season, 18 games, for betting on his own team while he was out with injury. The NFL's system for determining consequences is unfair, inconsistent, and requires change. Beginning with my first point, the method for determining any sort of suspension for NFL players is incredibly unfair. In some cases, the punishments given do nothing to deter the behavior of the player, and do nothing to keep them from continuing their action with the economic power they retain. According to Amanda Zink, the punitive model is unlikely to achieve the goals of either serving society or satisfying fans, but these pervasive issues with tremendous negative public health effects, as well as specific associations with NFL participation. How can fans or general society be content with a system that finds gambling and marijuana use more important to their image than sexual assault? The problem with the system they implement is that we don't know. Their punishments are inconsistent and depend on the opinions of individuals. The commissioner, Roger Goodell, can make decisions related to these public relations and what punishments are issued. He benefits monetarily from people like Deshaun Watson playing, especially when he returns to play against his former team, the Houston Texans. Having these types of decisions delegated to specific individuals can allow certain biases among NFL insiders to affect the punishments doled out. In Sean Perdon and Marianne Marar's Jacobian's academic journal, Touchdown Sentence, they note a 2016 study on fines that are issued to athletes between 2012 and 2014. Black athletes were more likely to receive fines for a second time, and fines were 15% higher than a white counterpart. And this alone doesn't improve there's some racist agenda working against black athletes in the NFL, and it is conducted over a short period of 2 years. However, this does raise the question of how an individual's perception of athletes can influence decisions that impact their career, finances, and public perception. Though it has once again raised the question among the football community, this is nowhere near as controversial as the decision regarding a suspension in the NFL. Inconsistency among these decisions have caused a great deal of controversy among fans of the league. The NFL lists out punishments in regards to many different offenses on their player conduct policy. They do note that each case can be judged on how serious or the circumstances surrounded each individual incident. However, instead of using the policy as a baseline and deciding from there, they seem to ignore it and come to their own conclusions. Christina Goldberg notes in her evaluation of violence against women in the NFL that the average numbers of games suspended for the accusations of violence against women was 4.08 games. The NFL's player personnel conduct policy lists a 6-game suspension without pay for general violence and violence against women by athletes. There's discrepancy in these numbers, which shows that the punishment system does not align with their own policy. This can be exemplified in multiple cases in the NFL that have outraged the public. I'll talk about a few of them to show what I mean. In 2010, Ben Roethlisberger was accused of sexual assault of a woman. The details of the incident are hard to listen to, and I won't be going into it for a greater extent. The most important and possibly the most disturbing part of the entire incident was how people reacted to it. In an article written by Chris Mortensen on April 21st of 2010, he wrote about how the 6-game suspension was issued. Not only the NFL, but the Steelers staff seemed to be content with the decision. They had given the length that was expected given their code of conduct. However, Ben Roethlisberger and his attorney David Cornell expressed their frustration about the length of the suspension. Suspension was later reduced to 4 games, which seemed as though it was a decision only meant to appease Ben Roethlisberger and his fans, who cared more about what the suspension meant for the team instead of the woman affected. Even the article written seemed to focus more on how the suspension affects the team capabilities of winning than on the actions that took place, discussing future games they would have to play without Ben and how the team would succeed while he was out. Comparatively, the reactions around Deshaun Watson have been more polarized. From what I've seen, and some examples I'll point out to you from social media, people believe he should either never play football again or shouldn't have been suspended in the first place. Biased and highly opinionated fanatics have always been a given when it comes to the sports league. However, these situations have polarized fan bases in a much bigger way than often seen. Now, the first one I'll show you, you can see people accusing him of being a rapist and he sexually assaulted 20 women, but some people also just retain their opinion that there's no proof, which, clearly isn't true. Now, this next one, you can see people just yelling at each other in comments. They get so frustrated just based on what they believe to be true, based on their sports team. And other people comparing Calvin Ridley's use of marijuana to sexual assault of 26 women just seems completely outrageous. For one of the sports I love, to undergo some of these problems has been beyond frustrating, and seeing people defend these actions has been even more so. Creating a haven for these actions brings down the entirety of the sport. However, acting out in the other extreme to solve the problem creates many more of its own. If the NFL began acting hastily before the results of any sort of action, so like an investigation, had come in, could seriously harm our league. For an example, of predetermining these sorts of decisions can unfairly affect a player. I'll use a safety for the University of Kentucky football team. Vito Tisdale and a group of players went to a frat party and got to a nonviolent altercation. One of the people at the party later claimed he had brought a gun and threatened people at the party with it. He and the group he was with were arrested and charged with burglary, and he was charged with wanton endangerment. The police began an investigation into the incident, but before the conclusion of the investigation, the university indefinitely suspended Tisdale. This altercation took place before the season, and it took until there were only 2 games left of the 12-game season for an investigation to be concluded, and the charges were dropped. In the end, people who were at the party refuted that he'd brought a gun or threatened that he had one. In fact, the people that had claimed Tisdale had brought a gun had lied to the police to get the players in trouble, as the charges were dropped due to false and fabricated evidence. Multiple people heard the woman who claimed he had a gun say, "Who let the N-words in?" as well as some other awful remarks targeted at the players. The players are now filing a lawsuit against the Lexington Fayette Police Department. However, they will never get the time back they lost from the sport and their lives. If teams prematurely suspend players who have not been proven guilty of doing anything, some horrible mistakes can be made that will ruin players' lives. Many different perspectives around off-field problems can be validated by the events that surround the league and the sport in general. The most important part is to learn from these problems so that we can progress in a way that is most fair to the player while not allowing violence against others. Hopefully, the NFL can grow from where it is now and become an organization that takes not only profit but the effect that their actions have on players, fans, and people that are harmed by these actions.